In a quiet town where life usually moved at a slow and predictable pace, an event unfolded that would leave everyone talking for weeks. It all began on a crisp autumn morning when the local courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. People from different corners of the community had gathered, drawn by curiosity or duty, to witness a trial that had captured the town's attention. The case itself was about a property dispute, something mundane compared to what was about to happen inside those walls. But among the crowd stood Thomas, a man whose calm presence always seemed to command respect despite his unassuming appearance. Thomas was not just any man. He was the town's chaplain, a figure known for his wisdom and kindness. For decades, he had served the community, offering comfort during times of grief and guidance when people felt lost. On this particular morning, he had been called to testify as a witness in the trial. His role was simple: to provide context about certain events related to the disputed property. Yet, as he made his way through the crowded hallway toward the courtroom, he couldn't shake off a strange feeling of unease. Something about today felt heavier than usual, though he couldn't pinpoint why. As Thomas entered the courtroom, his polished black shoes clicked softly against the tiled floor. He wore his usual attire, a neatly pressed suit paired with a modest tie, but there was one detail that caught more eyes than usual. Around his neck hung a small silver cross, glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights. To Thomas, this cross wasn't merely a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of his faith, a reminder of who he was and what he believed in. He never thought twice about wearing it because it had always been part of him, much like the air he breathed. Little did he know this tiny object would soon become the center of a heated debate. The room fell silent as Thomas took his seat on the witness stand. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp features, adjusted her glasses and gave him a brief nod before signaling for the questioning to begin. At first, everything seemed normal. Lawyers asked their questions and Thomas answered them clearly and honestly, his voice steady and measured. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the opposing lawyers, a tall man with a booming voice, suddenly interrupted the proceedings. Rising dramatically from his chair, he pointed directly at Thomas and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," he declared loudly, "I must object. This is a secular court and religious symbols have no place here." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room like waves on water. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, craning their necks to get a better look at Thomas and the cross hanging around his neck. Some exchanged puzzled glances, while others whispered heatedly to their neighbors. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. All eyes turned to the judge, waiting to see how she would respond. She paused for a moment, her expression unreadable before finally speaking. "Mr. Thomas," she said firmly, "you are required to remove the cross while testifying in this court." Thomas froze, his fingers instinctively brushing against the cool metal of the cross. For a few seconds he didn't say anything, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Removing the cross felt wrong, almost like betraying himself, but defying the court carried its own risks. As the silence stretched on, the lawyer who had raised the objection smirked triumphantly, clearly satisfied with the disruption he had caused. Finally, Thomas found his voice, though it trembled slightly as he spoke. "Your Honor," he began, choosing his words carefully, "this cross isn't just an accessory. It represents my faith and my identity. Asking me to take it off feels like asking me to deny a part of who I am." His statement sent another wave of murmurs coursing through the room. Some people nodded sympathetically, understanding the weight of what he was saying. Others frowned disapprovingly, believing that rules were rules and exceptions shouldn't be made. Meanwhile, the judge tapped her gavel lightly, trying to restore order. "This court operates based on principles of neutrality," she reminded everyone sternly. "Religious symbols can potentially influence perceptions, which is why they are not permitted here." Her tone left little room for argument, yet Thomas still hesitated, torn between compliance and conviction. Just as the situation threatened to escalate further, a soft but unmistakable voice broke through the tension. "Your Honor," came the call, clear and confident. cutting across the murmurs like a blade slicing through fog. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Standing near the back of the room was Aisha, a Muslim woman who had been sitting quietly until now. Dressed in a long, flowing hijab and a modest dress, she carried herself with dignity and grace. Though she hadn't yet taken the stand as a witness, her presence commanded immediate attention. Without waiting for permission, she continued, her voice ringing out with quiet authority. If we demand someone to abandon their beliefs, even temporarily, are we not stripping them of their humanity? Her words landed like a thunderclap, stunning the entire room into silence. For several moments, no one dared to breathe. Even the judge appeared momentarily taken aback, her gavel hovering mid-air as if frozen in time. Aisha's intervention was completely unexpected, especially given the context. In a setting where emotions ran high and divisions often surfaced, her act of solidarity transcended barriers that typically kept people apart. She wasn't defending Thomas because they shared the same beliefs. She was standing up for something far greater, the right to remain true to oneself without fear of judgment or punishment. As the reality of what had just transpired sank in, the atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift subtly. People glanced at each other uncertainly, some nodding slowly in agreement while others furrowed their brows in thought. Even the lawyer who had raised the objection looked uneasy, fidgeting with his papers as if searching for a way to counter what had been said. Thomas, still seated on the witness stand, stared at Aisha with wide eyes, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. He hadn't anticipated support from anyone, let alone someone whose faith differed so vastly from his own. Yet here she was, speaking, words that resonated deeply within him, and perhaps within others too. The judge cleared her throat, breaking the spell that had fallen over the room. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her. There was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, as though she were weighing the implications of her next decision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Given the circumstances, she announced, her voice steady but tinged with reluctance, the chaplain may retain his cross during his testimony. However, I remind everyone present that the purpose of this court is to seek truth and administer justice impartially. Let us focus on that goal above all else. With those words, she banged her gavel once more, officially moving the proceedings forward. Though the hearing resumed as planned, the mood in the room had changed irrevocably. People listened more intently, their minds preoccupied with what had just transpired. Thomas, for his part, felt a renewed sense of strength as he clutched the cross close to his chest. And Aisha, having returned to her seat, remained silent once again, but her actions had already spoken volumes. Outside the courthouse later that day, whispers of the incident began to spread, sparking conversations that would continue long after the trial ended. What started as a routine legal proceeding had transformed into something extraordinary, a moment of unity amid division, a reminder that compassion could bridge even the widest gaps. As the hearing continued, the courtroom remained unusually quiet, as if everyone was still processing what had just happened. Thomas answered the remaining questions with a newfound sense of confidence, his earlier unease replaced by gratitude and resolve. The cross around his neck seemed to shine brighter now, not because of its material but because of the weight it carried, both literally and figuratively. People in the room couldn't help but steal glances at Aisha, who sat calmly in her seat, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Her decision to speak up had shifted something intangible in the air, creating an atmosphere that felt heavier, yet strangely hopeful. When Thomas finished testifying, he stepped down from the witness stand and made his way toward the exit. But before he could leave, he paused near the back row where Aisha was seated. His heart raced as he debated whether or not to approach her. He didn't want to seem intrusive, but he also knew he couldn't walk away without saying something. Finally, gathering his courage, he leaned slightly forward and whispered, "Thank you." Aisha looked up, meeting his gaze with calm brown eyes. For a moment, neither said anything, their silence speaking volumes about the bond they had unknowingly formed. Then, with a small nod, she replied softly, "You're welcome." That brief exchange marked the beginning of something unexpected, a connection between two people who might never have crossed paths otherwise. After the day's proceedings concluded, Thomas lingered outside the courthouse, waiting for Aisha to emerge. When she finally stepped out, blinking against the late afternoon sunlight, he approached her hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, extending his hand. Aisha smiled gently and shook it, her grip firm and reassuring. "It's important to stand up for what's right," she said simply, brushing off his gratitude as though it were unnecessary. Yet there was warmth in her tone, a kindness that put Thomas at ease. The two began to talk, standing on the courthouse steps as the autumn breeze rustled the leaves around them. At first, their conversation was polite and formal, each sharing basic details about themselves. Thomas explained how he had become the town's chaplain after years of serving in various churches, driven by a desire to help others navigate life's challenges. Aisha, on the other hand, spoke about her journey of rediscovering Islam after moving to the town several years ago. She described how her faith had given her strength during difficult times, much like Thomas's cross did for him. As they talked, they realized they had more in common than they initially thought. Both had faced moments of doubt and loss, and both had found solace in their beliefs. Their conversation drew curious glances from passers-by, some of whom recognized Thomas and whispered among themselves. But neither Thomas nor Aisha paid much attention to the stares. They were too engrossed in their discussion, which slowly veered toward deeper topics. Thomas admitted that he had always been wary of how others perceived his faith, especially in public spaces. "Sometimes I feel like wearing this cross makes me a target," he confessed, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Aisha nodded understandingly. "I know the feeling," she said. "Wearing my hijab can make me feel exposed too, but we shouldn't let fear dictate who we are." Her words struck a chord with Thomas, and he found himself nodding along. For years he had struggled with balancing his faith and the expectations of society, often questioning whether he should keep certain aspects of his identity private. Hearing Aisha articulate similar struggles gave him a sense of validation he hadn't realized he needed. In turn, Aisha appreciated Thomas's openness, finding comfort in the fact that someone from a different faith background could understand her experiences so well. Their shared vulnerability created a bridge between them, one built on mutual respect and empathy. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the courthouse lawn, Thomas and Aisha reluctantly ended their conversation. Promising to stay in touch, they exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Thomas walked home that evening with a lighter step, his mind replaying the events of the day. He couldn't stop thinking about Aisha's courage and the impact her words had made, not just on him but on everyone in the courtroom. Meanwhile, Aisha returned home feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Though she had only spoken up because it felt like the right thing to do, she now realized the ripple effect such actions could have. It wasn't just about defending Thomas. It was about challenging narrow-mindedness and fostering understanding. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the town, fueled by those who had witnessed it firsthand and eager to share the story. By the next morning, it seemed like everyone was talking about what had happened in the courtroom. Some praised Aisha's boldness, calling her a hero for standing up against injustice. Others admired Thomas's willingness to defend his beliefs, even when it meant going against authority. Social media buzzed with posts and comments, some supportive and others critical, but all contributing to a larger dialogue about faith, identity, and tolerance. At the local cafe, patrons debated over cups of steaming coffee. "Did you hear about what happened at the courthouse?" one man asked, leaning forward excitedly. His friend nodded, adding, "Yeah, it's crazy. That Muslim woman really stuck her neck out for the chaplain." Nearby, a group of women discussed the implications of the judge's ruling, wondering whether it set a precedent for future cases. Even school children overheard snippets of the story from their parents and brought it up during recess, asking questions about why someone would object to a cross in the first place. The debate extended beyond casual conversations and into more structured settings. Local radio stations invited guests to discuss the issue, while community leaders organized forums to explore themes of religious freedom and coexistence. Some argued that courts should remain entirely secular, free from any symbols that could influence perception. Others countered that personal beliefs were inseparable from identity and deserved recognition, even in formal settings. These discussions weren't always peaceful. Tempers occasionally flared and disagreements arose, but they reflected a growing desire to address underlying tensions within the community. Amidst the chatter, Thomas and Aisha became unlikely, symbols of unity. Strangers stopped them on the street to express admiration or ask for their thoughts on the matter. While Thomas humbly deflected praise, emphasizing that he had merely followed his conscience, Aisha embraced the opportunity to encourage open-mindedness. "We don't have to agree on everything to respect each other," she often said, her message resonating deeply with those who heard it. Together, they inspired others to reflect on their own biases and preconceived notions, sparking a wave of introspection that rippled through the town. Despite the positive outcomes, challenges remained. Not everyone approved of Aisha's intervention or the judge's eventual ruling. Some accused her of grandstanding, while others dismissed the entire incident as irrelevant to the case at hand. Tensions occasionally bubbled to the surface, particularly during heated discussions where old prejudices resurfaced. Yet these moments of friction only underscored the importance of continuing the conversation. Each clash served as a reminder that progress rarely came without resistance, and that persistence was key to fostering lasting change. For Thomas and Aisha, the aftermath of the trial reinforced their belief in the power of compassion and solidarity. They continued to meet regularly, sharing stories and insights that enriched their understanding of each other's worlds. Over time, their friendship grew stronger, becoming a testament to the idea that differences need not divide us. Instead, they could be bridges, connecting hearts and minds in ways that transcended boundaries. And as the town gradually moved past the initial shock of the courtroom incident, it carried with it a renewed commitment to embracing diversity and nurturing unity, one conversation, one action, and one moment of courage at a time. The days following the courthouse incident brought a mix of emotions for both Thomas and Aisha. While they were heartened by the positive reactions from many in the community, they also faced criticism and skepticism. Some people accused them of seeking attention or stirring unnecessary controversy. Others dismissed their actions as irrelevant to the legal process, arguing that personal beliefs had no place in a court of law. Yet, despite the backlash, neither Thomas nor Aisha regretted what had happened. If anything, the challenges only strengthened their resolve to keep pushing for understanding and acceptance. Thomas found himself reflecting deeply on the experience. He spent hours sitting in his small study, staring at the cross that had become such a focal point of the trial. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It represented his faith, his values, and his identity. For years, he had worn it without hesitation, never imagining it could spark such a heated debate. But now he realized how much symbolism mattered, not just to him, but to others as well. The cross wasn't just a reminder of his beliefs. It was a conversation starter, a way to connect with people who might otherwise never understand where he came from. One evening, as he sat flipping through an old Bible, Thomas thought about Aisha's words. "Faith connects us more than it divides us." Those simple yet profound words echoed in his mind, making him see things in a new light. He began to wonder if his role as a chaplain extended beyond comforting those in need. Perhaps he could also serve as a bridge between different faiths, helping people find common ground even when they seemed worlds apart. With this idea in mind, Thomas decided to take action. He reached out to local religious leaders, proposing a series of interfaith dialogues aimed at fostering mutual respect and understanding. To his surprise, many agreed to participate, intrigued by the notion of working together toward a shared goal. Meanwhile, Aisha grappled with her own reflections. She hadn't intended to become the center of attention, but she couldn't deny the impact her intervention had made. People stopped her in grocery stores and at community events, thanking her for standing up not just for Thomas but for principles of fairness and inclusion. At first, she felt uncomfortable with the praise. insisting that she had simply done what anyone should have done. But over time, she came to accept that her actions had resonated with others in ways she hadn't anticipated. This realization filled her with a quiet pride, though she remained humble about her role in the unfolding story. Aisha also noticed subtle changes in how people treated her. Before the trial, some had viewed her hijab as a barrier, a sign of difference that set her apart from the rest of the community. Now, however, she sensed a shift, a growing curiosity and openness. Strangers approached her with questions about her faith, eager to learn rather than judge. One woman even invited her to speak at a book club meeting, hoping to provide members with a better understanding of Islam. Though Aisha initially hesitated, worried about being put in the spotlight, she eventually agreed. Her presentation was met with enthusiasm, sparking lively discussions that left everyone feeling enriched and inspired. As weeks turned into months, the bond between Thomas and Aisha continued to grow stronger. They met regularly, often over coffee or during long walks through the park. Their conversations ranged from lighthearted topics like favorite books and childhood memories to deeper subjects like the struggles of maintaining faith in a world that often misunderstood it. Through these exchanges, they discovered that their differences were far outweighed by their similarities. Both had faced moments of doubt and fear, yet both had found strength in their beliefs. These shared experiences created a foundation of trust and friendship that transcended religious boundaries. Their relationship became a source of inspiration for others in the community. Neighbors who once saw religion as a dividing line began to view it as a potential unifier. Parents encouraged their children to befriend classmates from different backgrounds, while teachers incorporated lessons on diversity and tolerance into their curriculums. Even local businesses got involved, hosting cultural exchange events and fundraisers to support interfaith initiatives. Slowly but surely, the town began to transform, shedding old prejudices and embracing new possibilities. Of course, progress wasn't without its hurdles. There were still pockets of resistance. Individuals who clung stubbornly to outdated views and refused to engage in meaningful dialogue. Some criticized the interfaith meetings, claiming they undermined traditional values. Others mocked Aisha's efforts to educate people about Islam, accusing her of proselytizing. But instead of letting negativity deter them, Thomas and Aisha chose to focus on the positives. Every kind word, every gesture of support, reinforced their belief that change was possible, even if it took time. One particularly memorable moment occurred during a community festival held in the town square. Organized by a coalition of religious groups, the event featured food, music, and activities representing various cultures and traditions. Booths were set up where attendees could learn about different faiths, ask questions, and even try on traditional attire. Thomas and Aisha worked side by side at one of the booths, handing out pamphlets and answering inquiries with patience and warmth. As they interacted with visitors, they marveled at how eager people were to learn and connect. At one point, a young boy approached the booth, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can I wear this?" he asked, pointing to a decorative cross necklace displayed on the table. His mother hesitated, unsure of whether it was appropriate, but Thomas smiled reassuringly. "Go ahead," he said, picking up the necklace and placing it gently around the boy's neck. The child beamed, running back to show his friends. Watching this scene unfold, Aisha felt a lump rise in her throat. Moments like these reminded her why she had spoken up in the courtroom. That day had planted seeds of understanding, and now they were beginning to bloom. By the end of the festival, the atmosphere in the town square buzzed with excitement and goodwill. People lingered long after the official program ended, reluctant to leave the vibrant celebration of unity. Thomas and Aisha stood together, watching as families laughed and danced under strings of colorful lights. For the first time in a long while, the air felt lighter, freer. The tensions that had once simmered beneath the surface seemed to have eased, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. That night, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Thomas turned to Aisha and said, "Do you think we're making a difference?" She paused for a moment, considering his question. Then, with a soft smile, she replied, "Maybe not in the whole world, but definitely here." And sometimes, that's enough. Her words stayed with Thomas long after they parted ways, lingering in his thoughts like a gentle melody. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew they weren't alone. Together, they had sparked something extraordinary, a movement toward empathy, understanding, and unity. And as long as they kept moving forward step by step, they would continue to inspire others to do the same. As the weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that day in the courtroom continued to spread throughout the town. What had started as a single moment of courage and solidarity between Thomas and Aisha blossomed into something far greater, a movement toward understanding and connection. The interfaith dialogues they helped organize became a cornerstone of this change, drawing people from all walks of life who were curious, skeptical, or simply eager to learn. Each session was different, shaped by the unique perspectives of those who attended. But one thing remained constant: the sense of hope that filled the room. The first few meetings were small, held in the basement of a local church with only a handful of participants. Thomas and Aisha sat side by side at the front, their presence calming any initial awkwardness. They began by sharing their personal stories. Thomas spoke about how his faith had guided him through grief and loss, while Aisha described how her hijab symbolized strength and resilience. Their openness encouraged others to open up too, and soon the group grew larger as word spread. People brought their questions, their doubts, and even their fears, creating an environment where no topic was off limits. One evening, during a particularly lively discussion, a man named Robert stood up hesitantly. He was a retired mechanic with grizzled hands and a weathered face, someone who rarely spoke in public. But tonight he felt compelled to share his thoughts. "I've always been confused about why some people wear symbols of their faith," he admitted, looking directly at Thomas. "It's not that I don't respect it, I just don't understand it. Why is it so important?" The room fell silent as everyone waited for Thomas's response. Thomas smiled gently, sensing the sincerity behind the question. "For me," he began, holding up the cross around his neck, "this isn't just a piece of metal. It's a reminder of what I believe in: love, forgiveness, and hope. When I wear it, I feel connected to something bigger than myself. It gives me strength when times are tough." His voice softened as he added, "But I also know that not everyone sees it the same way. Some might see it as a barrier rather than a bridge. That's why conversations like this matter. They help us understand each other better." Robert nodded slowly, digesting Thomas's words. Then, turning to Aisha, he asked, "What about you? Does your hijab mean the same thing?" Aisha took a deep breath before answering, her tone thoughtful and measured. "In a way, yes," she said. "My hijab is a sign of my devotion to God, but it's also a statement about how I want to live my life, with humility and purpose. It reminds me to be mindful of my actions and to treat others with kindness. Like Thomas said, it connects me to something greater than myself." The exchange left a lasting impression on everyone in the room, including Robert. After the meeting ended, he approached Thomas and Aisha to thank them for their honesty. "I never thought about it like that," he confessed. "Maybe we're not as different as I thought." This simple acknowledgement marked a turning point, not just for Robert but for the entire group. From then on, the discussions became more candid and heartfelt, breaking down walls that had once seemed insurmountable. Outside of the meetings, Thomas and Aisha worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. They collaborated with local schools to introduce programs focused on diversity and inclusion, ensuring that children grew up learning to appreciate differences rather than fear them. Teachers noticed a shift in classroom dynamics almost immediately. Students began asking thoughtful questions about cultures and religions they didn't understand, sparking conversations that carried over into lunch breaks and playground games. Even parents reported seeing changes at home, as kids shared what they had learned with enthusiasm and curiosity. At the same time, Aisha partnered with a group of women from various faith backgrounds to launch a community garden project. The idea was simple yet powerful: bring people together through shared labor and shared harvests. Volunteers worked side by side, planting seeds, pulling weeds, and tending to crops under the warm sun. As they dug their hands into the soil, barriers melted away, replaced by laughter and camaraderie. One Saturday morning, as Aisha knelt beside a row of tomatoes, a young Christian woman named Sarah joined her. "You know," Sarah said with a grin, "if someone told me 6 months ago that I'd be gardening with a Muslim woman, I wouldn't have believed them." Aisha chuckled, brushing dirt off her gloves. "And if someone told me I'd be doing this with a Christian woman, I probably wouldn't have believed it either," she replied. "But here we are." Moments like these became commonplace, proof that relationships could flourish when given the chance. The garden itself became a symbol of unity, its vibrant produce distributed to local shelters and food banks, nourishing both bodies and spirits. Despite these successes, challenges still arose. Not everyone embraced the changes happening in the town. Some residents clung to old prejudices, viewing the growing inclusivity as a threat to their way of life. Anonymous letters criticizing Thomas and Aisha appeared in mailboxes, and social media posts accused them of pushing radical agendas. While hurtful, these attacks only strengthened their resolve. Instead of responding with anger, they chose compassion, inviting critics to join the dialogues and hear firsthand what they were trying to achieve. One such critic was Margaret, a stern woman in her 70s who had long been vocal about her disapproval of anything she deemed untraditional. She showed up unannounced at one of the interfaith meetings, arms crossed and lips pursed. Her arrival caused a stir, but Thomas welcomed her warmly, offering her a seat near the front. Throughout the session, Margaret listened silently, her expression unreadable. When it came time for questions, she surprised everyone by raising her hand. "I'll admit, I came here expecting nonsense," she said bluntly, earning nervous chuckles from the crowd. "But hearing you talk about your faiths, it made me realize I don't know as much as I thought I did. Maybe there's value in listening instead of judging." Her admission stunned the room into silence before erupting into applause. Margaret left that night with a promise to return, her hardened exterior beginning to crack. As winter approached, the town prepared for its annual holiday festival, a celebration traditionally dominated by Christmas decorations and carols. This year, however, things were different. Thanks to Thomas and Aisha's efforts, organizers decided to make the event more inclusive, incorporating elements from Hanukkah, Diwali, Eid, and other celebrations. Lights strung across the main street twinkled in multiple colors, representing the diversity of the community. Booths offered treats from around the world, and performances showcased music and dance from various cultures. It was a joyful reminder that unity didn't mean uniformity. It meant embracing the richness of difference. On the night of the festival, Thomas and Aisha stood together, watching as families gathered in the square. Children ran between stalls, clutching candy canes and menorah-shaped cookies while adults exchanged stories and laughter. Someone handed Thomas a cup of hot cocoa, and another pressed a plate of samosas into Aisha's hands. As snowflakes began to fall, softly blanketing the ground, Aisha turned to Thomas and said, "This is what we've been working toward, isn't it?" Thomas nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes," he replied. "This is what happens when we choose understanding over division. Look at them, all of them, celebrating together." He gestured toward the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. They weren't just neighbors anymore, they were friends, allies, and partners in building a better future. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its bumps, Thomas and Aisha knew they had planted seeds that would continue to grow. Their journey wasn't about erasing differences, it was about finding beauty in them. Together they had proven that faith, far from being a source of conflict, could be a foundation for connection. And as they stood there, surrounded by the warmth of community, they felt certain that their town and perhaps the world beyond it was moving in the right direction. As the months rolled on, the changes in the town became even more evident. The seeds of unity that Thomas and Aisha had planted were now sprouting into something remarkable. A community that valued empathy over judgment, curiosity over fear. People who once walked past each other without a second glance now stopped to chat, exchanging smiles and stories. Strangers became acquaintances, and acquaintances became friends. It wasn't just about religion or faith anymore. It was about seeing one another as human beings first, with shared hopes, struggles, and dreams. One chilly morning, Thomas received an invitation from the local library to host a storytelling event. The theme was faith and life, and participants were encouraged to share personal anecdotes that highlighted how their beliefs shaped their everyday experiences. At first, Thomas hesitated. He wasn't sure if people would be interested in such an intimate topic, especially given the lingering tensions in some corners of the town, but Aisha urged him to accept the offer, reminding him that vulnerability often led to deeper connections. Sometimes, she said with a gentle smile, the most powerful stories are the ones we're afraid to tell. The day of the event arrived, and the library's cozy meeting room buzzed with anticipation. Chairs were arranged in a circle, creating an atmosphere of equality and openness. As people filed in, they brought not only themselves but also dishes of homemade food: fried chicken, biryani, empanadas, and apple pies. The mingling scents of spices and baked goods filled the air, adding warmth to the already inviting space. Thomas and Aisha sat together near the center, ready to guide the conversation but also eager to listen. When it was time to begin, Thomas stood up and addressed the group. His voice was calm and steady as he explained the purpose of the gathering. Today isn't about convincing anyone or debating what's right or wrong, he said. It's about sharing our stories, the moments when our faith gave us strength, comfort, or clarity. Let's use this time to understand each other better. With that, he invited Aisha to go first. Aisha took a deep breath before speaking, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She began by recounting a memory from her childhood, when her family had moved to a new city and struggled to adjust. We didn't have much money back then, she recalled, her voice soft but steady. But every Friday, my mother would cook a big meal and invite neighbors over, no matter who they were. She believed that kindness could break down walls. And you know what? It worked. Those meals turned strangers into friends, and those friends helped us get through tough times. Her story was met with nods of approval and murmurs of agreement. When she finished, several people thanked her for sharing, their eyes reflecting admiration and respect. Inspired by Aisha's honesty, others followed suit, each tale more heartfelt than the last. An elderly Jewish man spoke about lighting candles during Hanukkah and how the ritual reminded him of resilience in the face of adversity. A young Hindu woman described celebrating Diwali with her family and the joy of lighting lamps to symbolize the triumph of light over darkness. Even those who didn't identify with any particular faith joined in, sharing stories of finding meaning in acts of service or moments of connection with nature. By the end of the evening, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The success of the storytelling event inspired similar initiatives throughout the town. Book clubs began reading novels written by authors from diverse backgrounds, while art galleries hosted exhibits featuring works inspired by different cultural traditions. Schools introduced programs where students interviewed elders from various communities, documenting their life stories and preserving them for future generations. These efforts weren't just about ticking boxes. They were about fostering genuine understanding and appreciation. Amidst all this progress, Thomas and Aisha continued to meet regularly, their friendship growing stronger with each passing day. They often reflected on how far they and the town had come since that fateful day in the courtroom. One afternoon, as they strolled through the park, Aisha paused to watch a group of children playing soccer. "Do you remember when kids used to stick to their own groups?" she asked, nodding toward the field. "Now look at them, all mixed together, laughing and cheering like they've known each other forever." Thomas smiled, following her gaze. "It's amazing what can happen when we focus on what brings us together instead of what sets us apart," he replied. "But I think we still have work to do. Some wounds run deep and healing takes time." Aisha nodded thoughtfully. "You're right," she said. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step counts, no matter how small." Their determination to keep pushing forward was tested soon after, when a controversial issue arose. A proposal to build a new mosque in the outskirts of town sparked fierce debate. Supporters argued that the growing Muslim population needed a place to worship, while opponents claimed it would disrupt the area's character. Tensions flared, with heated arguments erupting at town hall meetings and online forums. For a moment, it seemed like the fragile unity they had worked so hard to build might unravel. Determined not to let fear dictate the outcome, Thomas and Aisha took action. They organized a series of open forums where residents could voice their concerns and ask questions. Experts were invited to address misconceptions about mosques and Islamic practices, while members of the Muslim community shared their perspectives. Thomas moderated the discussions, ensuring everyone felt heard, while Aisha provided insights born from her own experiences. Slowly but surely, the tone shifted from hostility to curiosity. People realized that the proposed mosque wasn't a threat, it was an opportunity for growth and coexistence. In the end, the decision to approve the construction passed narrowly, but the process itself proved transformative. Opponents and supporters alike left the final meeting with a newfound understanding of each other's viewpoints. One man who had initially opposed the project admitted, "I came here thinking I knew everything about this issue. Turns out, I didn't know anything. Thank you for helping me see things differently." The victory wasn't just about the mosque. It was about proving that dialogue could overcome division. As news of the outcome spread, neighboring towns took notice, reaching out to learn how they too could foster inclusivity. Thomas and Aisha found themselves invited to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing their journey with audiences eager to replicate their success. Though flattered, they remained humble, emphasizing that real change started at the grassroots level. Back home, life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The interfaith dialogues expanded beyond religious topics, tackling issues like mental health, poverty, and environmental sustainability. Volunteers collaborated on projects ranging from cleaning up local parks to tutoring underprivileged students. Each initiative reinforced the idea that working together transcended differences, creating bonds that were stronger than any single belief system. One spring afternoon, as cherry blossoms bloomed and painted the streets pink, the town held its first Unity Walk. Hundreds of residents gathered at the courthouse steps where the infamous trial had taken place. Together they marched through the streets carrying banners and signs that read messages like "Faith unites" and "Different paths, same destination." At the end of the route, Thomas and Aisha stood side by side, addressing the crowd. "We started this journey because we believed in the power of compassion and understanding," Thomas said, his voice ringing out clearly. "And today we stand here as proof that those values can transform lives." Aisha stepped forward, her smile radiant. "Let's keep going," she added, "because every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world." As the sun set behind them, casting golden hues across the horizon, the crowd erupted into applause. Children waved flags, adults hugged strangers, and tears of joy flowed freely. In that moment, the town wasn't defined by its differences, it was united by its humanity. And though challenges lay ahead, Thomas and Aisha knew they had laid a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. Their story was far from over, but for now they allowed themselves to bask in the beauty of what they had achieved. A community bound not by sameness, but by love. As summer approached, the town seemed to hum with a newfound energy. The changes that had taken root over the past months continued to grow, spreading their branches wider and reaching deeper into the hearts of its residents. Thomas and Aisha found themselves at the center of this transformation, not as leaders but as catalysts, people who had sparked something extraordinary simply by choosing compassion over conflict. Their actions had inspired others to do the same, creating a ripple effect that touched every corner of the community. One morning, as Thomas prepared for another day of meetings and conversations, he received a letter in the mail. It was from a young man named Daniel, someone he barely recognized at first glance. Attached to the note was a photograph of a teenage boy standing awkwardly in front of a church, his arms crossed defensively. "You might not remember me," Daniel wrote, But I was one of those kids who used to tease you about your cross when I was younger. Back then, I didn't understand what it meant to you, or why anyone would want to wear something so openly. But after everything that's happened lately, the talks, the festivals, the Unity Walk, I started thinking about how wrong I was. I'm sorry for being unkind, and I hope you can forgive me. Thomas read the letter twice, his heart swelling with emotion. He remembered Daniel now, a troubled teenager who had struggled to fit in and often lashed out because of it. What struck him most wasn't the apology itself, but the fact that Daniel had taken the time to reflect on his past behavior and seek forgiveness. That evening, Thomas called Daniel and invited him to coffee. They met at a small cafe downtown, where they talked for hours about faith, identity, and the power of second chances. By the end of their conversation, Daniel left with a smile, promising to volunteer at the next interfaith event. Aisha, too, encountered moments of unexpected grace. One afternoon, while shopping at the local market, she bumped into Margaret, the same woman who had once been so critical of her efforts. To Aisha's surprise, Margaret greeted her warmly, even complimenting her hijab. "I never thought I'd say this," Margaret admitted, "but you've made me see things differently. I still don't agree with everything, but I respect what you're doing. And honestly, I think the town is better for it." Aisha thanked her, touched by the sincerity in her words. These encounters reminded her that change didn't happen overnight, but when it did, it could be profound. The ripple effects of their work extended beyond individual relationships and into larger institutions. Local businesses began adopting policies that promoted inclusivity, from offering prayer spaces for employees to hosting cultural awareness training sessions. Schools revised their curriculums to include lessons on global religions and traditions, ensuring that students grew up understanding rather than fearing differences. Even the courthouse, where it all began, became a symbol of progress. A plaque was installed near the entrance commemorating the day Thomas and Aisha stood together, reminding visitors of the importance of tolerance and unity. Yet, despite these successes, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes happening around them. Some people moved away, unable or unwilling to adapt to the shifting dynamics. Others grumbled privately, accusing Thomas and Aisha of pushing their agenda too far. Anonymous flyers appeared on doorsteps criticizing the growing diversity in town, while social media posts accused them of eroding traditional values. Though hurtful, these criticisms only strengthened their resolve. Instead of responding with anger, they chose patience, inviting detractors to join the dialogues and hear firsthand what they were trying to achieve. One particularly tense moment came during a town hall meeting about expanding the library to include a multicultural section. Opponents argued that such an addition would dilute the town's heritage, while supporters insisted it celebrated it. The debate grew heated, with voices rising and tempers flaring. Just when it seemed like the discussion might spiral out of control, a young girl stepped forward. She couldn't have been older than 10, clutching a book tightly to her chest. "Why are we fighting?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear. "Books help us learn about each other. Isn't that a good thing?" Her innocent question silenced the room. Adults exchanged sheepish glances, realizing how petty their arguments had become. When the vote finally took place, the proposal passed, unanimously, with even the staunchest opponents raising their hands in support. Afterward, several residents approached the girl to thank her for her courage. Her simple act of speaking up served as a reminder that wisdom often came from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest voices carried the greatest weight. As autumn returned, painting the trees with shades of red and gold, the town held its second annual Unity Festival. This year's celebration was bigger and brighter than ever, drawing visitors from neighboring communities eager to experience the spirit of inclusivity firsthand. Booths lined the streets, showcasing art, music, and cuisine from cultures around the world. Performers danced to rhythms that blended seamlessly, while storytellers captivated audiences with tales of resilience and hope. At the center of it all stood Thomas and Aisha, watching as families laughed and played under strings of twinkling lights. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky, Thomas turned to Aisha and said, "Do you think we've done enough?" She smiled, softly, shaking her head. "We'll never truly be done," she replied. "There will always be more bridges to build, more hearts to open. But look at what we've accomplished so far. Doesn't that give you hope?" Thomas nodded, his gaze drifting toward the crowd. People of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs mingled freely, united by a shared sense of belonging. In that moment, he realized that their journey wasn't just about changing minds, it was about touching souls. Months later, as winter settled in and snow blanketed the ground, Thomas and Aisha sat together in the warmth of a cozy cafe. They reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful day in the courtroom. The friendships forged, the barriers broken, the lives transformed. Neither could have predicted how far they'd come, nor could they claim credit for the miracles they'd witnessed. All they had done was plant seeds of kindness and let them grow naturally, nurtured by the care and courage of those around them. "I wonder if we'll ever fully understand the impact of what we've done," Thomas mused, stirring his tea absent-mindedly. Aisha chuckled lightly. "Maybe not," she said. "But does it really matter? What matters is that we tried, and that others are still trying. That's how change happens. One step at a time, one person at a time." Their conversation drifted to plans for the future. There were new projects to tackle, new stories to tell, and new connections to make. Yet, amid all the excitement, they remained grounded in the belief that true unity wasn't about perfection, it was about effort. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to heal wounds and mend divides. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its bumps, they faced it with unwavering optimism. As they parted ways that evening, the snow falling gently around them, Thomas and Aisha felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for each other, but for the entire community that had rallied behind them. Together they had proven that faith, far from dividing people, could unite them in ways they never imagined. Their story was far from over, but for now, they allowed themselves to savor the beauty of what they had achieved, a town bound not by sameness but by love, and as long as that love endured, they knew anything was possible.